Hello to everybody, to Researchers Excellence Network, one more scientific event. It's a great pleasure for us to host Professor Monet Chair in the Europe, Professor Uroš Pinterič from Slovenia, who came to share his experience in European Union topics, thematics, and I'm very happy that this professor is a good friend of Researchers Excellence Network, promoting this network as well as supporting all the time. So thank you, Professor, for being here, for accepting us in your lecture to give it for public. And at the same time, I would like to encourage everybody who are connected online as well as participating here to give additional questions for Professor after his presentation. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Vita, for this nice introduction. Forget all the titles. I'm going to discuss this a bit later, but since I think that kind of lots of you already know me from previous years, yes, I'm still Uroš and I'm still doing these things pretty much informally. What happened in between? Yes, at the Faculty of Organization Studies in OMS, so we got the grant of Monnet Chair with the title of European Union of Tomorrow, where we are trying to not really deal with the experiences, but more dealing with the different possibilities of future development of the Europe. And in order to understand the future development of the Europe, somehow we need to dig into the past. From this perspective, I'm trying to address one topic today very briefly, and it would be European Union in the hands of European nations, because as you all know, European Union is the composition of the nations covering geographical continent of Europe. Politically, the situation was developing over the centuries, and I will try to not really give the experience because there is zero experience, but I would like to give the overview over certain topics which might in the future somehow influence the development of the European Union, whatever this way will be. For sure, please, once again, if somebody has some questions, you can interrupt me now, you can interrupt me during the lectures, or you can wait with your question until the end of this lecture or presentation. So, where the development of the European nations and at the same time somehow European Union started. First thing that we need to know is that idea of the joint Europe is older than we usually think. Just, to warm up a bit, any guessing what would be the early stage of common Europe or joint Europe when it started? In which years? Any guesses? I understand that some of you are only starting your studies, so you might be just curious. Some of you already should have some functional knowledge of this idea. Guesses? Somebody? No? Okay. So, not to prolong this this suffering, obviously, European idea, joint European idea, in one way or another, is much older than we think. Yeah, it goes into the 19th century. So, first idea of having multiple countries joined into one big union, if you want, whatever this means from the semantic perspective, should be already in the 19th century. How it developed further? Well, very much in the opposite way. Yeah? So from the early 19th century idea of joint Europe, we got to the position that in the mid-9th century, we got something that we call Spring of Nations, or in some cases, March Revolution of 1848, 1849, when we have first individual ideas that there are something like Germans, Austrians, Slovenians, before you had Serbians, whatever you imagine. But this is not something new. This existed already before through the history. You had the historical kingdom of Serbia going back into the Middle Ages. You have the Prussia, which is already functional, obviously, before. You have the France, which was kind of developed, like at least, let's say, 50 years earlier, yeah, during the French Revolution and similar things. So ideas in individual nations started a bit earlier or very much earlier. But what happened in mid-19th century was, in fact, this general spread of the nationalistic ideas, that there is something like, you know, if you want Italians as additional case, realization of this idea in the case of Italians happens about 15, 20 years later. In 1866, Garibaldi joining the whole Italy, going from one county to another county, from south of Italy towards the north, occupying the territories and joining them together. Yeah? And what happened in between was obviously spreading the idea that there is no difference between Veneto, Lombardy, and so on, but this is all Italy. The language is kind of similar or very much the same. You get afterwards the standardized language, in this case Italian, and so on. So, in order to understand in what kind of hands European Union is today, it's good that we understand that there was some past which was maybe a bit different. And this past got even more violent within next 50 years. First World War, 1914, 1918. Then you have economic crisis. You have the destroyed pride of certain nations. That was like, you know, what was later on becoming a Germany or strong Germany. It was after the First World War completely destroyed, paying huge reparations to the nations which were suffering from their military activities in the First World War, because Germany lost. On the other hand, you had the nations which were doing better, in the sense, suffering during the war, the World War, huge causalities, and on the other hand, the peace agreement gave them those reparations, huge amount of money, and so on. So what happens next? The Germany is not prepared to pay the money anymore. There is an economic crisis all over the Europe, in 1920s. And from this perspective, obviously, the money is slowly going away, the economy stops, and at the same time, there we get the new system of ideas. On one hand, immediately after the First World War, you have the different political system which starts to exist in the territory or of modern Russia, to say so. Yeah, you have the October Revolution. Bolsheviks are coming in. In 1920s, Hitler is starting to take over the power in Germany. In Italy, Mussolini for the first time manages to establish the exact timetables of the trains which were never before running properly, and also afterwards the Italians are not really synonym for the punctuality or something like this. So is it important from this perspective that I'm saying? No, not really. I'm just trying to make some kind of a sketch of what the Europe was going through, to the point that you get to the Second World War. In the Second World War, the killing is much more severe. We all know this part of history, one way or another, regardless on which side of the guns people or our ancestors were standing. This is really becoming, from the modern days, this is becoming very much unimportant. Yeah, somebody was shooting, somebody was shot, regardless who was where. But what this brought up was revitalization of the idea of joint Europe. Because after the First World War, you already have the idea, we need to do something, we need to have a different idea. You get this first sketch of what becomes after the Second World War United Nations Organization. This idea was not done on the global level for the global purpose initially. It was done in order to maintain the peace in Europe. And it was kind of figured out that peace in Europe is kind of crucial also for the peace in the world. Because whatever happened in the Europe, it always influenced, at that times, it always influenced also the United States of America, or if you want, North America. It influenced Asia one way or another. So today we are afraid of very much similar situation, that there will be maybe somebody else, maybe somewhere else, who will do something, sorry to say, but stupid, and this will at the end of the day cause the general spread of the fight all over the world. We have right now the very critical situation, I would say, in Syria. About half a year ago or something, there was huge discussion what happens potentially in North Korea. It can be just, limited military action, but you never know how far it can develop, because you have the big superpower, you have the strong neighbors around, and you have specific interests. Because it's not just about what kind of regime you have in a certain country, it's also about who is controlling certain territory. Because if you see the map, how it goes with the, let's say, American military presence, sure, it's important for the peace in the region, but it's important also from the perspective that it continuously circles or sieges the Asian countries, two big Asian countries. One is considered also to be European, so you have Russia, and the second thing is obviously China. Nobody is still talking about India in this perspective, but for sure American military forces are strategically positioned around those two countries in order to prevent what? Attack on the territory of United States. Yeah, they learned something from Pearl Harbor in this perspective. Okay, so this is a situation in which we need to think about what's going to happen with the Europe, how the Europe will be developing in this perspective. In many cases, we are kind of relying on stronger partners in the perspective. I know that 3 presidents that you should be aware of them were recently, like two weeks or something like this ago, in United States meeting the President of United States, asking for certain things, yeah? Somebody? Well, what was this about? 3 presidents visiting Donald Trump? Yeah? And what was the main point of this visit? Sorry? Yes, stronger NATO support. Yeah? Strengthen the military presence of not NATO, but technically United States in the region, because there is the potential that something would happen. I'm not discussing right now this potential, but what I'm trying to do here with this example is illustrating that European Union, in many cases, is relying, in fact, on stronger partner, because the only one who can leverage with the Russian military power is, in fact, United States. Because NATO without the United States is pretty much, let's say, the Siberian tiger without the teeth. Yeah, so nice big cat. Yeah, it can still crush you, but just because it's very heavy. But it doesn't have the main element of warfare, which is his teeth. So that's why I'm saying that we are always relying on the stronger partner. And in this perspective, this stronger partner can say yes or can say, no, we are not playing this game anymore. And what happens in the next element, especially in the perspective of the let's say, recent history. It's history because it's already past, but otherwise it's these days situation. So 2015 shook up the Europe pretty much badly with the migration crisis, which was showing one of the main problems of the European Union which existed today. It's not unified in their ideas. It's something which is the problem from the early stages, returning back into the 19th century, early 19th century, returning back to 1950s, 1951, 1956, when the European Union was, first European institutions were getting established. And there was a political idea to have something more. But there was the political reality saying we cannot have more than certain organizations for cooperation in certain fields, like atomic energy, economic cooperation, and steel and coal regulation. So this is the basic institutions of European Union in 1950s. And sure, we want to have something like United States of Europe, but what we can do is have some kind of a international structure which will be running more or less policies, especially in the fields connected to the economy, one way or another. Fishing, agriculture, economy in general, whatever you want, everything contributes in the first field to the economy of the nations, regardless of what you're doing. Yeah. And this is the main fields. For instance, whenever it comes to the question of taxation, whoops, doesn't work. It's the sovereignty of the nation. Whenever it comes to legal systems, not really. As long as it's not, if it's not economic system, no, that's the sovereignty of the nation. Like typical cases, common defense and common foreign policy. This is something that European Union is trying to introduce for pretty much long time now. And we have the agreement on the paper. In the practice, the situation is completely different. Yeah, so still the countries are running independent foreign policies, independent military policies, as much independent as it goes within the NATO context. Yeah, so this is something which is obviously defining the general logic. There was in 1990s. So-called Western European Union, and it was especially connected with the military aspects of European Union, which was kind of balancing, or it was part of NATO within NATO. Yeah, so Western European Union, in this perspective, was trying to provide the defense positions without taking into the account Americans as a strong partner doing something within the European context itself. Didn't function for very long, and especially when the 2004 enlargement came in, this became very much abandoned idea, which is today revitalized to a certain degree. So the talks about the military forces in Europe in European Union are reappearing, but it's just the political talk. There is very little in the sense of trying to find some solutions. It's very little to propose some actual ideas because it's too hard and it's too demanding from the position of the sovereignty of the nations. So that's why, or that's one of the reasons why the title of this lecture is how the European Union is in the hands of European nations. We can reach any kind of agreement as long as it goes with our national identities, as long as it goes with our national visions, which sometimes we lack them all. Yeah, so sometimes we are out of the vision. I had a very interesting talk yesterday with some colleagues, and my question was, what is the Lithuanian vision for your country in, let's say, 30 years? Do you have something like this? Because, for instance, in 1990s, all our countries were in pretty much similar situation, and we had all the same goal. Slovenians, for 15 years, or something like this, we were working to join the European Union. Regardless, left politics, right politics, opposition, government coalition, we need to get into the European Union. And I would say that pretty much same logic was applying for Lithuania, for Estonia, for Malta, for all those 10 countries. Similar logic is applied right now, I would say, to a certain degree, not maybe that strong, but still to Serbia. Yeah? It was the same logic before in Croatia. It was the same logic in Romania. So the countries had the vision, what is their main goal, regardless of political differences among the people and so on. When we reach this goal, some of our countries, including Slovenia, fell asleep. And they were not able to redefine new vision, what we want to be in 2030, what we want to be in 2050. I'm not saying the strategies, for instance, economic strategy, you have it, maybe. You have the higher education strategy. I'm not discussing what this means for the Lithuanian higher education, but I understand what's going on, yeah. You might have the economic strategy, healthcare strategy, sure, everything this is nice, but you don't have, or for instance, in Slovenian case, we don't have the vision, which would be how those strategies should, could, would contribute towards this common goal, what we want to be within 15, 20 years, something that we would all work together regardless of political differences or anything else. And this is something that creates, you know, or better this way, which destroys the innovation within the nation. Because we don't know why to be innovative. We are just making the incremental changes in our policies, making sure that we are running the country according to the current trends, whatever it is. Yeah? So something happens, we react. And we are always reacting. We don't have something that we will be working for. So we became not, we stopped being proactive, we are just responding to the situations. And when you can imagine that you have lots of such countries within the bigger frame, which is obviously in our case called European Union, what we can do with this stuff? Well, you have just the reactive countries. We are standing at the place, so European Union tries to get through with some ideas, and we are saying, well, as long as it doesn't happen, whatever it's going to be, yeah? Because last year, in fact, it was in late March 2017, European Union, or better European Commission issued so-called white paper on the future of Europe, yeah? And there is 5 different scenarios inside. Pretty much from nothing will happen to we will increase our powers within the European Union, among the European countries, and we will go closer to this basic idea, which was in fact achieved maybe for a short period of time, only once in the history. During the highest spread of ancient Roman Empire. At that time, we had actually joined Europe as much as it was possible, and it was functional in the sense that everybody was working for the capital city, which is Rome, obviously. Sure, there was lots of rebelling, there was lots of territories which were not covered, and so on. But there was sovereignty of the Rome, more or less. If it was not functional, there was the military forces making sure that the taxes are paid, that things are happening. And at the same time, also the, so let's say, peripheral regions were getting some benefits from the Roman technologies and so on. Today, we are trying to do something similar, just without the military force, without, you know, some kind of repression, keeping our national identities, and trying to make people understand that we can have this joint Europe with different means and that everybody can benefit. So, where is the problem, or what kind of problem happens when you get, what, 1.5 million, maybe 2 million people who are not belonging in? 2015, big wave of migration, predominantly of Syrians and some other nations. Refugees, economic migrants. There is always a debate what it is and which one is prevailing. In any case, The stories are very different, and I can honestly believe sure that there is a certain percentage of people which were even returned from European countries back to the territories, war zones, and that this was something that we shouldn't do. And that there is, huge amount of economic migrants which maybe have nothing to do in Europe in the way how they came in. I'm not saying that they are not welcome. I'm just saying that the way how they get into the territories of European Union, it's not the way how they should do it. And this was all that we needed. Let's say 2 million. I can give you 4 million because nobody really knows the exact numbers. Yeah, lots of people are hiding one way or another. I can double the number just to make sure. But 4 million within 450 million of genuine European population, it's what, 1%? 1% of very fast income flow of the migrants or of the new population with a bit different culture background. It's enough that European Union needs white paper on what we want to be on one hand, and it needs to redefine all, 60, 70 years old friendships which were built out of the war zone, which was Europe in 1940s. Yeah? So what happened was that within a very short period of time, European nations, sure, they were not fighting in the classical sense, but we created lots of tensions. From the perspective, there was a Germany welcoming everyone because of their economic needs. There was Sweden integrating everyone, and obviously some are saying that they caused themselves by doing this lots of problems for themselves and others. There was a very interesting situation between French and Great Britain when the migrants were trying to get in the Great Britain and obviously got stuck in France and so on. So then you have pretty much, I would say, the Eastern Central Europe, with the exception of Austria, which were like, we don't know anyone, we don't want anyone. And at the same time, the guys were not really interested, but the Brussels said, no, there is a quotas, so you will get potentially, I don't know, let's say 2,000 people as what you need to do as a courtesy to the European Union. 2,000 people out of 2 million, that's not really much on one hand. On the other hand, what happens next is that the people who are fleeing the war zone or searching for better economic opportunities are not necessarily getting these better opportunities for better life, because in some of our countries, we cannot provide them these opportunities, especially for those which came as economic migrants. Well, if they're staying, what you can offer them? I mean, in Lithuania, I can imagine that your economy is right now running bit better than Slovenian one. But for instance, in Slovenian case, our national unemployment is too high that we would be able to integrate into the economic system, for instance, 2,000 new workers coming from the countries which have different culture, coming with basic knowledge of the language, of Slovenian language, which is non-existing, yeah, and with the salaries which are not meeting the needs of the people. So from this perspective, somebody who is trying to get for better economic life, this is considered probably one of the basic human rights, as I understand, yeah, also under the majority of our constitutional documents, that we have certain rights to fulfill our economic desires, put legally one way or another, obviously. But when you cannot assure the situation, what you can do? And those people are staying, they're stuck in certain country because of European quotas, instead of staying in Germany, which needs the workforce, and trying to integrate there, and they're trying to survive the best. In Slovenia, for instance, we have right now at least one strong case, when there was a guy who a Syrian guy, managed to learn some Slovenian language, help the government to process, all the migration flow coming from the Syria by, translating, from Syrian language to Slovenian language. At least that the government or the police had some idea who is coming. And now, when the migration flow kind of stopped or slowed down a bit, the government is trying to expel him from the country because they figured out that he could stay already in the Croatia. The guy who learned the Slovenian language. Sure, it's not the perfect, but it's functional, you can understand him in Slovenian. And these kind of situations are then obviously posing the basic question: how the European Union will develop in the future when it's in the hands of European nations, which have very strong national identities still. And I'm returning to the question which I'm repeating probably now for 12 years or something like this. Common European identity versus the national identities of the European Union. First thing, what is important? That we never agreed on common European identity. We agreed on common European citizenship. So automatically being a citizen of one of the nations or one of the countries which is member state of the European Union, you become also the European citizen. And you have certain rights arising from it and also certain duties. If we check what happens with this European citizenship in the future, what we can do? Pretty much nothing, because we don't have the common foreign policy. We don't have something which would be United States of Europe yet. We have still national passports. Why this is important? Because this is the main document showing that certain countries are possibly better than the other ones. For instance, typical case is the measurement of the strength of your passport. How many countries you can enter with your passport without extra visa or something like this. I'm not really sure where the Lithuania is standing on this one, but for instance, Slovenian passport is rather strong one. Yeah. Then you have the German passport, which is stronger, or I think that the British passport is stronger, which means that for the most, you need to take this into the relative terms, but obviously with the American passport, you can travel more freely among those 200 and something states than, for instance, with, let's say, some strange case, Turkish passport, yeah, which keeps you pretty much in Turkey, maybe some neighboring countries. For everybody else, you need an extra visa, yeah. And why I mentioned Turkey? Because when the migration flow was coming in, European Union promised to the Turkey that they will abolish the visa regime for the Turkey for the European Union, so that the Turks would be able to travel around Europe just with a passport. Yeah? This didn't happen, and it led to some consequences as well. Second thing, which is going on with the European or common identity question, religion. In Europe, there is regionally what? 2, 3 basic religious groups. We have the Catholics, then we have the Orthodox, like originally, yeah, for instance, Romanians. Then you have the Protestants of one type or another. Yeah. Okay, Muslims, they are not belonging here, but there is a strong Muslim community in many countries. You need to take them into account. And they are not migrants. They are the consequence of past European histories or European countries' histories. How you get Muslims in Germany? Long-term working migrations from Turkey, from what we sometimes call Kurdistan, which is not really the state, but anyway. So you get Turks into the middle of Europe, Muslims into the middle of Europe. Nobody really cares about them. And now when we have new wave of couple of million Syrians, or predominantly Muslim refugees, Muslim is retaking the Europe. Not at all. The numbers won't change that much compared to what we already have as a Muslim community in the in the Germany, for instance. Then you have obviously Great Britain. You have there lots of Pakistanis, lots of people from Bangladesh, lots of people from India. Why? British colonies. India was British colony. And at certain time, sure, British Kingdom was taking the, or United Kingdom was taking the advantage of the territory that they had. Yeah? And they're not really wondering, they're accepting these people more or less. But sure, when the situation changed, Indians were welcomed in Great Britain. But this is the historical connection, which is not from Second World War. This is not historical connection from the First World War. It is the situation from 19th century. Why you have the people from Algeria and Morocco in France? Well, French colonies, yeah? And this is the native communities there. And now everybody goes, oh, there is a problem with the Muslims or whatever, non-French people in France. Yes, this is the consequence of inability of the basic nation to integrate those people into the normal life. Because they were, you're from Morocco, doesn't work for us. We don't want you at our schools teaching. We don't want you at our factories working. It's reserved for the French people, predominantly. I'm not saying for everyone, sure, but their ability to integrate into the society fully was much lower, yeah? And sure, then happens what? Ghettos, uprisings, and this is very nice ground that you get somebody who will be fighting on the side of ISIS in Syria and doing things which will obviously create the bad image about the people coming from certain regions just because of certain elements which are supportive. Yeah? So Islam as such, it's not the main reason. It's the fact why the guys from Belgium, from France are going to fight on the side of ISIS. They were kids with dreams, and their dreams were crushed in Belgium because they were of wrong race, because they belonged to wrong population. They were raised in ghettos. They didn't have the options, and they were not, even if when they had the options, they were refusing them, sure, because they didn't believe. I would say that the burden of this is mutual. But once when you are excluded from the society, most of people would prefer probably stay at the edge and just saying, I'm a poor guy who is not able to do anything with his life. I have no vision, I have no dreams, instead of doing something about stuff and fighting the system much better. Typical case of how this is potentially not happening, well, what is this, 60 years ago approximately, Barack Obama would be completely impossible to dream about becoming the American president concerning his skin color and system which existed at that time. At that time there was obviously some other fella who had a dream, and because of that dream Barack Obama was able to become the president. But this is the case of exceptions, or these are the cases of the strong wills. On the personal level, we usually have a bit weaker dream. And when you're not able to, increase your power and do something about stuff, you become angry kid. Becoming the angry kid, it's good potential to do something stupid within the country or somewhere else which will condemn you and the community that you belong to. So religion is next important thing. Second thing which is connected, or the third thing which is connected to common European identity and where we are failing, is pretty much connected with the symbols. What kind of symbols we belong to? In different countries, what kind of... Sure, I can imagine some symbols in Lithuania, or I can make them up, but you can tell me if I'm wrong or not. But for sure you have certain natural places that you considered important from the national perspective. I don't know about them really. Then you have some historical elements that you might consider important and they might be on the symbolical value. For instance, your coat of arms, as I understand, has the historical background. Identification with certain historical sites like Trakai Castle, like Hill of Crosses, whatever is the history behind, but it's something that I would say that it's very unique and you can be kind of proud of. Maybe I'm mistaken. In Slovenia, we have our highest mountain. This is something that you are obviously, lacking some way, but this is the geographical reality, and we consider it important. Then we have, for instance, the special breed of horse, this white Lipita horse. I'm not going into the history of it, but it's very important, and we are able to fight Italians, Croats, and Austrians over it. Yeah, who is the owner of this breed and how it happened? The truth is somewhere in between, and even the Spanish could say something about this. Then we have, for instance, for sure, some historical sites, like, okay, there is Predjama Castle, which is only one, if not one, I think that it's only one in Europe, which is built in the rock. Yeah? So not on the top of the rock or something, but it's built in the rock. And it's very much important element. And there are some caves and so on. There is this human fish Proteus. And we are taking national pride into these elements, and how we can find each other within this. You have something else, we have something different, and what is our joint point? At the end of the day, sure, there is the European anthem, which is in fact belonging to a certain person, and that's why a certain nation can feel better about it than everybody else. Because as European anthem, I would prefer to hear some Slovenian song. And from your perspective, probably you would be more happy that would be your composer, yeah, Lithuanian composer. From the perspective of the currency, sure, we have euro. Not all the nations. Some of them refused it. Yeah? So for instance, Sweden, even if they would be able technically to have the euro, they said, no, thank you. Czech Republic is also kind of refusing. It's not just about not getting it yet, but it's kind of, we can still wait a bit, yeah? Sure, European Union has certain rules. Then I think it's Denmark, one of the cases, which is also without the euro. And there is Great Britain, obviously, which is right now the case about which we can talk from different perspectives. Moment about this one. And then you have the European institutions. How many members of European Parliament you have? Yeah, I know that it's a good question. It's also a good question for me. Ladies, I know that you're from different department, but what would be the number of Lithuanian representatives in European Parliament? I have the same issue. Also in Slovenia, maybe 8 or 7. Do I know? No, not really. Do I consider it important? Not really. I can tell you about a lot about Slovenian Parliament, which tells us what is our concentration. We don't care about our European representatives. They are there, but they are not our main focus. And this is connected with our identity. About the Slovenian Parliament, as you are more or less, let's say, public administration students, yeah, I'm political scientist, we know something about this stuff. But when it comes to the European institutions, whatever, yeah, it's not really important. It's not something that would affect our life, because whatever they vote in the European Parliament doesn't really come to us very directly until very absurd changes. Like, what kind of light bulbs you can have. This one is very annoying up there, but it's allowed. Then you have those old ones with, this shining tiny rope in it, yeah, the classical one. They are today forbidden. You cannot buy them anymore, because European Union decided that they're not. They're too much. They're using too much energy. Okay, but this one is harming our eyes. Yeah, so that's the difference. And then you have this, very effective LED lights, and they are allowed, despite there is lots of discussion about their potential health hazard using them. So European Union decided something, and we are suffering this. The same goes with the kitchen appliances, house appliances like vacuum cleaners. If you're lucky that you bought one before, before 2015, more or less, you can have like 2000 watt, very strong machine, and as long as it works, it's great. Now, you cannot buy anything, I think, over 1000 watts or something like this, because the European Union decided that it's using too much energy. This is how we come into the contact, really, with the European Union. And based on this kind of contacts, it's very hard to build any kind of positive general European identity. Okay, going to what happens in the next step. You have Brexit. Why? Why Great Britain was so, not easily, but still kind of without too much trouble starting to exit the European Union? Because they had lots of exceptions. In the first place, one rule it's not valid for Great Britain. Second rule, not valid for the Great Britain. Third rule, Great Britain can apply it in a bit different manner. So Great Britain had lots of exceptions to the European legislation, to European rules, and from this perspective, they were always a bit more independent. And their independence was in fact the condition that they stayed inside in the first place. Because if European Commission would say, sorry guys, we're not playing this game anymore, you go like everybody else. Nope. European Union functions as long as you have the exceptions. When the Great Britain should take some financial responsibilities, which was part of the story because the Great Britain is contributing a huge amount to the European budget, when then there was disagreement within different policies, when there was this France-Germany alliance within the European Union, which was kind of determining where the Europe should go in the future, Great Britain would be just paying for it in the sense. They said, no, we don't want to pay for this because it's not something that we identify ourselves with. So from this perspective, Great Britain decided to exit based on their non-inclusion in the past. But based on what I was saying over last half hour or something, it's very hard to imagine our countries would be willing to provide more power to the European Union and at the same time maintain the national states. Because European taxes nowadays, they are one of the options for the future development. Which means that, okay, you are predominantly young guys, most of you I would say that you are not working, my colleagues obviously have different experience in this sense. Your country is taking certain amount of money from your salary. And then you get European tax, which would be European Union is taking certain amount of money from. Now they are doing it indirectly. So, you pay the taxes to the national budget, and then from the national budget, Ministry of Finance allocate certain amount of money, obviously, to the European budget. But when you are thinking about the direct European taxes, it means that you would be paying it directly to Brussels, and this would be additional tax, unless they agree in different way. There is always a chance. But for us as citizens, this is very much unclear what happens. Yeah, there is no clear rules. And if these taxes, for instance, happen without our countries reducing, for instance, the personal income tax that we are paying to the national budgets, it means that from the money that we will get even less, and more money will go somewhere else. Do I really want this? I don't know what is the tax system in Lithuania, but under Slovenian conditions, not at all. So I prefer to have an independent country in this sense, paying just the Slovenian taxes. Does European Union provides me as a citizen enough benefits that I would stay within the European Union? Sure, we are students, we are working in academia. Yes, we have Erasmus, that's why I'm here. Erasmus is a European funding system for the students and academic staff, also for the secondary education, they can also use it. It allows me to travel. That's nice. We have Schengen. It allows me to travel easier than otherwise. So that's nice. But I don't need the huge, massive system which will be taking the money from me for all this. We can just agree as a countries that there will be a budget, which goes from the national budget, and we allocate exactly the same amount of money. Then we can decide for some other form of cooperation, let's say in the field of military. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. We can agree that we'll, from national budgets, allocate certain amount of money for one issue or another one. And then what we get? No more European Union as such. We just get a bunch of countries who agree on the cooperation in certain fields, and we are getting back towards 1951 options with the European Community for Coal and Steel or Euratom and similar things. So just the corporations that we choose that we will have. And one of the scenarios of the future development of the European Union is exactly this one. But you need to be aware then that at the point when something like this starts to happen, European Union, as we know it, ceases to exist, doesn't exist anymore. Yeah? It's not the option anymore. So from this perspective, whatever we are trying to do, probably European Union right now, it's the very soft balance or very, how to say, sensitive balance between what we want and what is actually possible. And whenever something will change, this balance will shift one way or another. As citizens of European countries, I would say that we obviously need to take into the account that we need to make sure that this balance doesn't go against us as citizens on one hand. At the same time, we need to make sure that this balance doesn't break back towards the situation that we saw twice in 20th century, so first in the Second World War. So the only lesson which can come from this is that whatever disagreements we have, we need to apply diplomacy instead of military. Whatever are our options, it's much harder to agree among 26 different, or now it's going to be 27 different nations after the exit of Great Britain. We need to figure out what is the common interest and not force the European Union as an institutional system over this common interest into reaching for something more, because we will create much more dissatisfaction with the European identity that we are potentially sharing as a Europe. Because this level of dissatisfaction will affect our willingness to positively cooperate within the framework which is offered to us as a European Union. At the same time, what this means, it means, in the first place, there will be no United States of Europe. That's the point. If we are starting to push towards this one, we will have much more national resistance, which can destroy what European Union so far developed as positive elements. And on the same side, we shouldn't allow that we make step backwards, which we are doing in certain fields. For instance, typical case Schengen. After the migration crisis, it was very much visible that Schengen, it's a very nice idea and functions just as long as European Union is not endangered from outside. Because when the migration wave came, Austria-German border, waiting time, 2-3 hours. You have usually at the airports, I would say that majority of you see these things at the airports, all passports, European Union passports. The same story goes on the roads with the border passes. It's all passports, always. So there is no positive discrimination when it comes to the Schengen, so that I would go to the European passport line and I would be let through much easier. So somebody coming from, I don't want to insult any country, but anyway, from Turkey, yeah, it will be standing, for instance, on Slovenian-Croatian border on the same line with me, with you, doesn't matter. Sure, they might be a bit more checked, but it means that I will have to wait just the same amount of time. Right now, Austria has for over 2 years already kind of more or less relaxed border control with Slovenia, with Slovakia, and they're trying to see who is coming in from the European countries. And Slovakia is the side country which was not even on the migration way. Yeah? So this is showing that in many cases the good things of European Union, when it comes to some bigger challenge, they are fading away. And this is something that we shouldn't let go just because we are maybe afraid as a nations of certain things, because the application of Schengen is obviously under the jurisdiction of individual countries. So Italy can decide that for a certain period of time they will be checking passports on the borders. That's Italian privilege, this is German privilege, this is French privilege, doesn't matter. So countries need to take their nationalisms with certain level of caution, not to create a situation when European Union will be or too tightened for the citizens with different identities, or on the other hand, when it will get destroyed by the external factors. Okay, I believe that my time is kind of slowly getting up. So if there is some questions, if there is something that I maybe address and I didn't, or should address and I didn't, if there is something that I said and maybe somehow made you mad and I should explain myself a bit more about this stuff, or defend myself, or said sorry for. If not, then thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for a very interesting presentation and your thoughts about the nation's role in European Union and about the future of our. We dreamed to become members of the European Union, and now we have not very clear vision what we are going to be after 60 or more years, but we hope we will manage with it. So I would like to ask if somebody has some questions. I can see online from Latvia. What leads towards strong European community?
What leads towards stronger European community? Maybe I will misunderstand this question the way, so I'm now checking the screen. If there will be some extra comments, please let me let me type this message if you need the information. But I would say that the only way towards a stronger European community is really the stronger European identity. Stronger European identity will happen when everybody from different groups of European countries will believe that we have the common ground, whatever this means. Unfortunately, modern European common ground is we are a continent of wars, including 2 world wars where pretty much, honestly, everybody was fighting everybody. Yeah? And part of our histories are still connected with this. Part of our today's situations are still connected to this. I know that in the Baltic countries you have certain elements which are connected to your past and they're blocking certain maybe cooperation possibilities. You have different identity in this sense. Also, you have strong Slavic group, you have strong Germanic group, you have strong Romanic group within the European Union. And having those 3 big groups, like the majority of them, sure, Finland, Ukraine, and then Baltic countries, they are not entirely Slavic, as I understand as well, yeah. You have different background, and you have the Hungary, which is also Ukrainic, yeah. So from this perspective, you have to find something which will combine those groups together, filling each other without, differences in the perspective. This is a rather general answer, I would say. But if you try to understand the specifics, you have the Slavic group, which is not just a linguistic one, but is the cultural one. And then you have the guys with the Germanic, with the Germanic predispositions. Those two groups are not really going well together in the sense of the similarities, cultural similarities. And this is probably, okay, there is no new question. Okay, so I'm going to stop answering this one. Thank you. How can European nations contribute the strength of European Union with communication? First thing, when you're trying to contribute to the strength of European Union with communication, is that you are listening, that you are trying to understand and ignore, because the ignoring of what you hear sometimes helps to prevent escalation of the conflicts. I have, let's say, absolutely no idea how to behave in Finland, for instance. I understand that those guys are a bit more reserved in the personal perspectives. Then you have the Slavic nations, which are a bit more, let's say, open in certain perspective, or if you want, the Mediterranean nations, which it's not Slavic, it's also Romanic group. Their way of communication is much more open, it's much more, sometimes might be rude, sometimes might be unpleasant for somebody who is very reserved, and vice versa, obviously, because for somebody coming from the Nordic countries, might be extremely unpleasant to meet the people who are, let's say, open, who are loud, and so on, and they don't know how to behave it. And this is the basic of the communication, really being able to not understand, but tolerate the differences. And one of the things which are very much problematic nowadays is that we are trying to tolerate the differences through political correctness, which means that we are all cut it down to very technical language, trying not to insult anyone. But what is more important is that we are trying to understand in the communication that sometimes what we consider as an insult is not necessarily the insult, but is the linguistic or cultural difference, and that maybe in some countries it's a bit more normal to be closer to the people, standing closer to the people, being more direct in the talks, trying to express your thoughts on the point, not all the way around just to not insult the person. That's something what I see really much in Sweden recently, that they are trying to be extremely correct, trying not to insult anyone because she's a woman. This is one of the minority issues. Second minority issue would be national minorities. Sure, if the guy is a Muslim, it's a Muslim, and we know how their culture approximately works, but we don't have the general idea. Sure, I'm not going to offer the person a pork, but I don't mind, from my culture perspective, making some joke on certain account. And I'm accepting this also in my case. And at the same time, I need to know that maybe in some cases, me telling a joke would be very much offensive towards some Swedish people, Finnish people who are like, what you're talking about? Sure, there is a context behind, which obviously those people don't understand, but they don't need to take it immediately as offense. And the other way around as well. So this kind of tolerance for different perspectives, it's the basics for the strength of European Union in the communication perspective. I'm not sure if I answered this question in the sense of what was meant. Maybe it should be a bit more explained, but when you wrote here about the strength of European Union and communication, I was immediately thinking about the general communication, not necessarily institutional one. Thank you for the answer, and I hope that this helps. Yeah. Okay. Somebody else? Yes, please. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question was what I think about Brexit and what's going to be the effect on Slovenia, just because I'm the one with the microphone for the record. Well, my opinion on Brexit is it's the choice of sovereign state. Yeah, it was done by the referenda, which is kind of respectable in the sense that nation was deciding about the stuff, regardless of very small difference between those who are pro-Brexit and those who are against Brexit. Yeah, and from this perspective, what I'm trying to see is that if you remember, it was, I think, around 2009, the Lisbon Treaty, and Ireland had 3 referendums. In Slovenia, the referenda was forbidden. They decided that thing is too much important that people could decide about this Lisbon Treaty. So Brexit is completely legitimate democratic decision, regardless of the consequence. That's for me legal perspective on this one. So I prefer Brexit, I prefer Slovenia exiting or Lithuania exiting if this decision is people, regardless of the amount of votes for or against. It's much better than, for instance, in Slovenian case, 90 members of parliament vote and they're representing very small share of population. When you do the total calculation, who is the coalition, how many people voted, and so on, and you figure out that there is about 15% of people who are actually represented in the parliament when you put the numbers together. This is electoral topic, it's different stuff. What will be the consequence for Slovenia? The consequence for Slovenia, to a certain degree, it will be economic one way or another, pretty much depending on what the Great Britain and European Union will agree in the final conditions of the exit. Yeah, so surely we will suffer a bit based on the amount of the economic exchange with Great Britain. Slovenia won't be that much affected. I'm not expecting that any of the European countries would be subject to visa policy, because this is not something which is on table as a end. So we will be still able to travel just with the passport to Great Britain. Yeah, so this is not something that would be too strange. Third thing, which might be important from Lithuanian perspective, is to answer the question in the sense of migration. Slovenians are not migrating to Great Britain predominantly, are just individuals. Yeah, because I understand that there is lots of Lithuanians who are migrating to Great Britain, Ireland, and so on. But in Slovenian case, this is minority. Majority of Slovenians would be migrating to Austria and Germany. So that would mean more problem for us in this sense. Because I don't know what was your direction, so I'm trying just to guess. Yeah, that's probably the effect on Slovenia. I mean, no, I don't consider it important. Something else? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your nice lecture, for such a wonderful and bright side to European Union issues.
Always questionable with me.
So thank you very much for your nice mood in our lecture, for knowledge that you shared with our participants. Thanks to all participants who were connected online and gave some questions to you. And we hope that we will meet with everybody in the next Researchers Excellence Network event. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.